Mr. Dennis Chung, thank you for coming. Leave a little money in the box for coming late, but I know you guys not supposed to be in the same place at the same time, you know, assassination and things, so. Yeah, you were at the pension fund. And Mr. Hugh from the Small Business Association, don't go anywhere, welcome. Thanks for coming. I know you said you have to leave, but thanks for being here. If you see me going back and forth or seeming not to be paying attention to our speaker, I was trying to get involved in our tweets online because we're also streaming the Economic Forum as well and have representation on Facebook. Those are the guys back there monitoring. And so I'm trying to sort of keep up and tweet from up here. It wasn't really working, but we'll get that part better. But I'm happy to be able to report on that as well. So that's it. That's our panel presentations. You heard our keynote. Dr. Phillips had to leave, but the panel is here, and this is the most important part, which is the audience participation. So we welcome all and any questions for our panel, for our VM team. Anybody here, any questions at all, even for people in our audience, because we have a great audience as well. I mean, we singled out some people, but many, many more people with deep interest in these subjects are here, and a wealth of knowledge, right, Michael Lake? A wealth of knowledge in the audience. So please feel free. Mic is open. Where am I? Yes, at the back? All the way at the back. Oh, well. Is it moving? Is it mobile? Yeah, man, that's great. So here we have a first comment in the front. Who's going to conduct these proceedings? Is it me? Come here. I think I've turned that.
Good afternoon. My name is Sushil Jain. As usual, I open the innings. Most of my questions or comments are for Denzel, since the minister has left. First of all, I noticed that you mentioned one sentence in your presentation where it says the energy sector needs new legislation for making generation and distribution more efficient. Can you elaborate on that? Now, I notice you also mentioned that as long as there is crime and so on, you cannot have investment. And despite that, you never even mention the word economic development. And without proper economic development, which is lacking in Jamaica and probably worsening, I don't know, you need to put the numbers together at Mona School. How can economic growth be sustainable? Now, in terms of excuses, the Jamaican economy always looks for excuses not to grow. I will give you an example. A few years ago, the only talk people used to do was the interest rates are too high, interest rates must drop, and luckily it happened. The treasury rate has gone down from 18% to 6% now. Now, where is the benefit of that reduction in interest rates in the economic growth statistics? Not seen, or negligible, or small. Now, the God gave us a blessing in the last few months, which has been dissipated already. The oil price has gone down from $100 US to $45. Where is the benefit of that percolating throughout the economic system, either in terms of water rates or electricity rates or gas prices or economic growth? When that happened, I thought that the economy will just boom, but it's not happening. Can you explain why is it not happening?
We're gonna ask Dr. Williams to answer. No, man, come. But we're gonna make him answer here so that the television, the media can get the benefit.
Thanks, Chair. I think, Sushil, you have touched on some important points, but let me just say I didn't mention about legislation at all for energy. I'm not too sure which. Yes, but I can't recall about legislation because I'm. No, I can't recall that.
I can bet on.
Yeah, well, I mean, but the idea, because I don't know much about legislation in terms of energy. What I did say is that what we needed to do was to get the energy going through MSTEM, yeah, and them. So we can disagree. But the real point is about energy. Yes, you're right. The cost of energy needs to be sorted out. I don't know who. Whether it be MSTEM or the ESET team or whosoever, but the general idea is that we need to have better management of that portfolio so that we can bring down the cost of energy. Your observation about economic development is spot on. I don't think anybody could argue against that development is critical also for growth, and it's a long-standing debate, but what you would also appreciate is that you also need growth in order to drive development. So this is proverbial chicken and egg, because if you don't have economic growth, it's really not going to be able to talk about economic development at all. So you really need to get the growth going, and therefore the critical elements to drive the growth are going to be important, which is really what the minister laid out in his comprehensive presentation, the correct macroeconomic framework, and then having all the players coming on board to do that. I want to make a quick comment on your point about all the variables going down, etc., but you're not seeing the stimulus in the economy. This is really because of some of the structural problems that you have in the economy. A case in point is, as we suggested, for example, how Jamaican economy is structured. What you really have are general traders. You really don't have people who are adding value to things in the economy. And if you talk about economic growth, you're not going to have a lot of trading contributing to GDP. What you're going to have is value added contributing to GDP. So despite the variables going in the right direction, if you don't deal with some structural changes in the economy and get more value added production in the economy, you're really not going to see a significant change in the growth rate. And that's part of the rebalancing, I think, that the minister was talking about.
Thank you, Denzel. William?
Yes, thank you, Michael. I have a couple comments, and I want to say I'm sorry the minister left, because I did have a question specifically for him, which I will raise, and I think it's important. The minister spoke about one of the biggest single impediments to growth has been the high debt that we have suffered as a country, and it's something that he did not touch on, but I think it's important in that due to this high level of debt that we have suffered over the last 30 years, it has required every year for the successive ministers of finance to go back for revenue raising measures in order to try and service the debt. The tax policy and tax legislation has had a significant negative impact on investor confidence, because every year there has been new tax policy, and every year new tax legislation that's been tried to be implemented. And it's one of the things that I think all of us in the private sector need to reinforce every chance we get, that if you look, for example, in this most recent quarter, just coming out of the EPOC meeting yesterday, corporate income taxes were up for the first time, I think, in a number of years, over last year by about 2 billion. And this is in the face of a lowering of corporate tax rates in a tough environment, where you actually, in the last quarter, we saw the first full year's effect of the employee tax credit on unregulated companies. So if that is the case, where we're seeing increased corporate taxes at a time when there's a lowering of the tax rate, one of the clear messages is that we have to have effective, stable tax policy and revenue measures, so that you don't have this concern by investors, and by even local investors, but foreign investors especially, that every year the rules of the game change with new tax measures.
Sure.
So that's the comment. The The other thing that I think is important, and I think I'd like to ask the panel to speak about, is labor reform. It's another real issue that just briefly was touched on, and I think the current laws that exist in Jamaica for labor put all of the emphasis on the worker and not on the investor. The worker is always right, and not that I have a problem with workers' rights, but I think, and as I said at a cabinet presentation recently to the Prime Minister, until we appreciate that the investor's rights are as important as the workers' rights, we will never have true confidence of investors, both overseas and local, to heavily invest in Jamaica and our economy. So I'd like that to be addressed.
Okay, thanks, William. I'm not sure who's going to touch that cookie, but that hot potato. But I can say though, William, I mean, when we see who volunteers from the panel, that it's something that I live, and interestingly, a lot of the larger companies really do have cutting edge labor relations, and I see it regularly, and we don't seem to want to even acknowledge it. And if we could acknowledge it and actually learn from each other, not just hold to a hardened position, I think we could go a long way, because a lot of international companies, a lot of local companies who are now international have adopted the stance that, look, we have to take care of our people, we have to do the right thing, and they are certainly pioneering labor reform in their own shops. But as a country, I don't think we wholesale embrace that kind of partnership, and I agree with you. I thought you'd love to have that. Too much spin on it?
Well, I don't want to address too much. I'm not an expert in labor relations, etc. So my colleagues at the business school who are more schooled in this type of thing could respond. But I will take the general point that you really need a more harmonious relationship between labor and capital in order for each of them to actually get the greatest return, because labor is seeking a return on their investment and capital is also seeking a return on their investment, and you need a more harmonious relationship. What I would say in addition to that as well though is that there are some critical laws that will also have to be looked at in terms of trying to make capital more motivated to invest. For example, our redundancy law. That's something that has to be addressed in a significant way, I think, in Jamaica. Similarly, the Bankruptcy Act is something also that has to be addressed. So all of that really should come under the Ministry of Labor. And it's interesting because the real question is, what is the role of the Ministry of Labor in setting the right climate for investment? I think that's really the fundamental question that should be asked. But I want to comment more, what I'm more comfortable on, William, and that is the issue of macroeconomic stability. You are fundamentally correct that if you're going to motivate investment, whether it be domestic or foreign investment, really what you need is a stable macroeconomic climate. And in macroeconomic stability, this is not merely about interest rate, but if you think about it, it's stability in interest rate, stability in exchange rate, predictable inflation, predictable things like your external balances, and critically that tax system that you spoke about. The problem with instability in the macroeconomy is that it imposes an unexpected cost on the business people for doing business, and therefore what you find is that you may have a budget today, and because of instability in the economy, it throws off your entire plan. So really and truly at the heart of driving economic growth is macroeconomic stability, and I think that is important.
Absolutely.
Michael.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me congratulate Victoria Mutual. It's been a very interesting discussion.
Thank you, Dick.
And that thing about the pensions, I'm wondering what's going to happen to all like me, 20 more years?
In 20 years' time.
20 years time. I want to raise one or 2 points for us to look at. in Denzel's presentation, he spoke about the short term, the immediate, the short term, and the long term. I know you put it on the chart that way. One of the most challenging things that you raised was that in the long term, we have to have law and order, and of course, crime is a disincentive to investment and to development. And here is the problem that we have in Jamaica at this point in time. The state of crime and the state of law and order is an immediate problem, Denzel. So I don't know, we need to find a way to deal with the immediate, because to talk about the long term does not encourage the investor or the worker and cannot see the factories opening for 2 and 3 shifts. So that's a point that maybe you want to just elaborate on a little bit. There is something else that has come up that we need to look at. Of course, climate change is all over the place, and we are suffering tremendously from that. The minister made a very great presentation, and in that, the focus in going forward for economic development for a country like Jamaica, in fact all countries, is going to have to be greater preservation of our natural resources and environment. That's the limited space, the limited resources that we have. And as you know, William, water is life. The critical thing that's going to determine the future of Jamaica is the preservation and use of our water resources. Everybody knows about the drought and the drying up. And in that regard, I want us to think of something here. There is a drive to re-establish bauxite mining in the cockpit country. And first of all, Professor Williams, is bauxite mining really a priority for Jamaica? And on the other hand, we are at a stage now where this cockpit country where we propose to do bauxite mining is a virtual treasure trove of natural products which Dr. Henry Lowe in the nutraceutical industries has established. University people and other scientists are getting billion-dollar contracts to establish natural medicinal products coming out of Jamaica, and this is where we're going to make the difference. So I just wanted us to really look seriously at this issue. What's the cost of mining the bauxite in the cockpit country versus the cost of preserving that ecological treasure for the future?
Thank you, Dickie Crawford. You know, I mean that is the lifelong tension between different industries, and it is up to the individuals, the activism of civil society, the lobby from the different industries to really guide the discussion to where we can make some judicious choices. You know, even if you look at Ocho Rios and you look at the fact that that's a designated tourism town with a bauxite pier in the middle of it, right? So it's not just now that is happening, and of course the discussion continues, and as resources get depleted, the discussion is going to become more intense and more serious because you're going to start impinging on different areas, as you are saying. So I think that then comes back to the whole question about personal responsibility and personal accountability, taking responsibility for our economic growth. And we can only do that if we keep our children educated and present in the argument, present in the country. So that's my
Guide or direct its resources for development.
right.
Right. Corners of the economy.
So sure. So and we've said that we believe our place is at the level of the individual, at the level of the family. That if we can provide the kind of support that we provide now through our financial solutions, our financial services, savings, the planning tools that we are now about to unveil, the personal empowerment that we are trying to give to the individual, to the family, that we've been giving for a century, but but that we're going to now bring that forward for our young people, today's aspirants. We think that that's our contribution. We think that if we can keep the family, give them some more, as the minister would say, fiscal space, right? Through savings, investments, the right types of loans, the counseling. We think that that helps the discourse. Hopefully it will help the discourse. And of course, our civic duty. I mean, clearly as a mutual, a big part of our mandate is our civil responsibility and our contributions on things like marriage and the family, the Marriage and the Family series, the under-13 football competition in Montego Bay. So sports, education, our scholarship programs, our bursaries, that kind of thing. But we do that every year, and we hope to do more and more and more of that. But we want to bring the discussion down to where you know what part you play in the economic development of the country and how Victoria Mutual is going to help you to play that part. So that's how I see it. Anybody else want to respond on that? But I thank you for that, Dickie. While somebody formulates a response, I have a question from Twitter. I don't have a handle. I'm not sure who it is, but it says, when you say building financial independence, what do you really mean? No, we just said that. Okay, but Richard, you want to take that?
I think Michael, in part, you just answered the question, but let me reiterate it. That, as we go through our life cycle, we have goals that we have to achieve, and inevitably the achievement of those goals requires some kind of resource allocation, and it requires really to achieve them on a sustainable basis. In the first instance, making some kind of plan. They require financial resources. Usually it requires the sort of putting off, postponement of consumption. So we have to save, we have to make specific plans for these goals. So that as we progress through our life cycle, it may be education, it could be housing, whatever it is. It could be for education for children, self-improvement. We need to have a plan, and we need to be able to execute that plan to be able to achieve those goals. Ultimately, we get to the point where we have to retire, and we need, at that stage, to have a pool of resources that will sustain us through our retirement years. So achieving financial independence really is a very unique thing to each person. It means different things to different people, but it involves a process, and the process is establishing goals, making plans, working those plans, adjusting them, so that we can seamlessly move through the life cycle and achieve the sort of life objectives and goals. And we think that we have the expertise, the suite of products and services, the planning tools and so on to facilitate the making of those plans, the execution of them, the adjustment of the plans as you go through, tracking of them, goal tracking and tracking the attainment of the resource allocation to be able to achieve those plans, so that persons make that transition through their life cycle and get to the end of the day when they don't fall into the large number of people that Rez alluded to, who don't have retirement resources to be able to see them through the golden years. But at that stage, when you get into the sort of the saving stages of life, there is a sufficient pot of resources that can see them through that latter stage of their life in comfort. So it really is a process, and we think that we really add value in that regard through the expertise, the tools, the advice, and the tracking that we can assist each person with in achieving that financial independence as defined by that individual.
I know the market people are going to want me to tell you that when we're done, those kiosks over there and those very nice comfortable chairs are to get you comfortable while we take you through the process and show you how it's done. So after the event, please feel free to check us out over there. I mean, it's something that we're really passionate about. We really care about this. We think that this is our role, our way to help move this country forward, and so we want you to be a part of this, our members. Yeah. So I think we've formulated an answer for Dickie. It was a bit of a bumper, but I think somebody wants to face it.
Yeah, we couldn't really not respond to some of the things that Dickie said. So let me just, firstly, Dickie had started the second one, which is the tension between development and the environment. That's a long-standing tension, but it's a real issue, especially in the context of a small developing economy that heavily depend on tourism. It's true that with sea level rising and all those types of things, and with this nature of climate change, it will impact tourism, it will impact agriculture, it will impact on daily lives, yes? And therefore we have to make sure that we make that balance to ensure that while we strive for economic growth and economic independence, we also put things in place to ensure that the environment is not degraded in a certain way. I mean, there are examples of how this thing has been done. For example, building the London Gateway. You will remember what they did in London with the wildlife, how they went about removing it. So there are models, there are ways and means of trying to do this. But what we really need to make sure that we have that balancing act. And I think that's critical. The more troublesome one that you mentioned was the issue of law and order. You're absolutely correct. Crime, again, is a tax on doing business. There's no doubt about it. Crime and all those things, they're added cost to doing business. Now, how do we deal with it is what you asked. The truth be told, Dickie and colleagues, we're going to have to take some unconventional means to get these things done. We really have to think very seriously about how we approach policing. We really have to think about social intervention in these communities. Some people would say grow the economy, reduce poverty, and you reduce crime. I'm not of that vintage at all, because I don't think crime is just a poor people issue. Yeah. So you really have to think about legislation that you can use to make sure that you have a police force that actually understands their role. You need to have better policing, citizen relationship, etc. But while you're working on all of those, in the short term, you really need to take some drastic measures, and that's why I would support, for example, the Bail Act that the Commissioner is now looking at, how we can use that very seriously to deal with this thing in the short term, because it's a serious detriment. I'll tell you something. We tried at university to get a professor once, just recently, to come over and help us. And when I spoke to her in London, you know what she said to me? I will come to Jamaica because of the crime. It's a very serious issue. It impacts on your human resource. It impacts overall on the economy, and it impacts on so many things, and it's real. People, the fear of crime is a real thing, and we have to do something in the very short term to deal with it. So I would suggest that one of the ways that you really need to think about is how groups like the human rights and those people come together with the state to organize better. How is it that we deal with the issue of crime and criminality, which is a dangerous scourge on our society?
Thank you. Thank you, Denzel. Yes, sir.
Okay, after spending about 11 years in China, a third world country, in most people's view, human capital is the way that they have made their investment. Training. This is the place of land of wood and water, right? So how come we're talking about water? Anyway, I am here as a visitor, and I can't even take a bath in the hotel that I'm staying at, right here in Kingston. So I agree that they have these, the minister talked about these 20,000 rooms online and 20,000 rooms. 2,000? Oh, sorry. But a whole heap of rooms that and a whole heap of water and agriculture. Somehow they tie in between what is needed for the hotels and what is needed for the population growth and so on is not matching. Is not matching at all. And Professor, they talk about multiplier effect, right? You know about that in your business, right? A multiplier effect. And we have here nearly 80% leakage. The money come in, but it's not even a pot with a hole. It's a sieve. It goes right back out to various countries. So somehow the government or other private sector, you're coming in to invest in our country, then you need to invest in the agriculture. China do that, Them even in exporting their workers. All them road and thing, them building all over the world. A Chinaman going with it, you know. It's not coming just by itself. So somehow I think that we need to copy this third world country of China. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we don't need to, you know, I used to believe in this thing of exporting labor, and I suppose, of course, there is a place for it because people need to find opportunities, and we have seen the return of investment, I suppose, if you look at it quite cynically. But the truth is we need to get our brain power to stay here. We don't need to be exporting that brain power. That's our problem. That's a big part of our problem anyway.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Well, my first comment is, well, we must exploit our natural resources. I think our economic problem must be that we are not exploiting it. And, well, the minister did mention that we must do more value added, including value added to our natural resources, not just mine the bauxite and put the dirt on a ship and send it away. So there's a lot of persons, and maybe in contrast to what Dickie said, we must consider using our natural resources. We are underutilizing them. And that this is why a number of persons are in the position that they are. Now, on the question of debt, which is a retardant to our growth, I would consider debt to something that can help you grow if you use it and invest it properly. Because most business use either equity or the debt to grow the business. Banks use probably 100% debt.
Not
as a business, I don't know. I'm not an expert, but I
we certainly don't.
Now, the question maybe to PIOJ is not there, or to the professor. Have anyone studied what portion of the money that we borrow were self-liquidating, meaning that their return on investment was able to liquidate themselves? To say this particular debt we borrow so much $100 million, we invested it or we utilized it, and it was able to, because these are the money that now come accumulating on themselves. I will find that, okay, that project didn't really turn out the way we wanted it. It did not produce the returns that were projected. But nobody come back and say, well, we made some assumptions and these assumptions were totally wrong. Right? And now we are paying the price because there is nothing to pay it back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, you know, we are the poster child for how not to use debt to grow your economy. Right? No, that's the truth. And this is why, I mean, personally, this is why my life is built around direct investment. My day job, that is. It's built around direct investment. It's built around foreign direct investment and local direct investment, because those are the only tools that we have at our disposal to grow the economy. Right? And that's why the elements that you talk about, the natural resources, and I think it's the judicious use of natural resources. I mean, nobody's saying that we shouldn't use our natural resources. And the interesting thing that you said a while ago is, you know, we are not exploiting our resources. And you're probably right. You know, we have depended on multinationals to exploit our natural resources because we had to. We didn't have the technological capability. But more than that, we weren't actually retaining the value that we should have in that relationship with multinationals. And again, I have to go back to the point that what retains that value is not a legislative tax rate. It is micro and small enterprises. It is individuals who work for those micro and small enterprises that can relate to those companies and sell them services. It is the employees of those multinationals that actually absorb the technology transfer and the income. You know, they get paid. That is how you retain money in the economy from the exploitation of those resources which we don't do ourselves. So it's all linked. We've got to take care of the individual. We've got to create talent and retain talent in this country. Favor. All right, up at bat.